You might want to imagine that had you lived under the famously oppressive regimes of the past, under Mao, Stalin, Hitler, Mussolini, and so on, that you would have been among the resistance, that you would have been on the side of truth, justice, and freedom. But statistically speaking, that's probably not true. Had you lived in those places in those times, it's quite likely that, along with a majority of your neighbors, you would have been proudly and loudly supporting and enthusiastically cheering for those oppressive authoritarian regimes. Now, you might disagree. Not you. You would have been virtuous, brave, and principled, right? Well, keep in mind, those oppressive regimes didn't just declare one day that they would be terrorizing, torturing, and murdering innocent people. Quite the opposite. Even the most vicious tyrants claimed that what they did was for the common good, was necessary for law and order, and to protect the people. And many believed it. Real world tyrants aren't comic book villains. Most people don't even recognize them as tyrants until it's too late. Those historical tyrants, they were all cheered on by huge numbers of people, well-intentioned people who saw themselves as the good guys and saw the disobedient scofflaws and rebels as the bad guys and deserving of whatever punishment the state might impose upon them. Dictators and tyrants, before they crack down on dissidents and resistors, always need to portray the disobedient as selfish criminals, as enemies of the people, as a threat to society. Meanwhile, the loyal, obedient subjects are told that they are the virtuous, intelligent, caring, and compassionate ones, the ones nobly sacrificing for the common good, being responsible, upstanding citizens by going along with whatever the political ruling class tells them to do. The masses have always been told by officials and experts of the state that a very real danger was threatening their country, their people, their way of life, their very existence. And they were told that the only solution was more authoritarian control. And they were told that any who doubted such fear-mongering or didn't approve of the authoritarian solution were just ignorant, uncaring, mentally unstable, or worse, that the disobedient were trying to harm the decent, good, law-abiding citizens. To get away with doing what they do, tyrants need their adoring masses to condemn and hate the disobedient, condemning the motives of any who don't fall in line. The resistors are always painted by the state as greedy and ignorant malcontents who don't care about others, don't care about their country, only care about themselves, endangering everyone else with their disobedience and rabble-rousing. Those in power can't have the masses even considering the possibility that the people disobeying and resisting also have good intentions and good reason for disobeying, that they care just as much, that they too are trying to do the right thing. No, the dissidents always have to be portrayed as stupid, irresponsible, or downright evil. The tyrants can never let dissenters be seen as good people with just an honest difference of opinion. So to avoid that, those in power go to great lengths to vilify, censor, and silence any and all opposing opinions. So the masses don't ever hear why those other people believe and behave differently. Because if the people were exposed to competing ideas, they might change their minds. So any skeptics or critics of state power have to be demonized, painted as callous villains. Their beliefs have to be mischaracterized, and their intentions have to be maligned. And most people who lived under those regimes, having spent so much of their lives subjected to authoritarian indoctrination, didn't have the thinking skills or the mental fortitude to even begin to question what they were told by the authorities. They had been taught to believe that government knows best and that it's there to protect the people. And even if those people had the ability to assess things objectively, which they didn't, the masses would never actually hear an open, honest public discussion or debate anyway. Those in power made sure the masses would constantly hear only the officially sanctioned viewpoint broadcast everywhere and at all times. As for any differing views, all the masses would ever hear was, those people don't care. Those people are selfish, ignorant, crazy, evil, not worth listening to. And for the good of the people, all those dangerous, misguided, dissenting views must be silenced. Even in supposedly advanced, well-educated countries, the masses have often been ignorant cowards, unable to think for themselves. And of the few who did have their doubts, most didn't dare to do or say anything to actually resist the lies and the injustice. And their excuse was, well, they couldn't afford to speak out, to make waves. They had too much to lose. So most people just followed along, acting like well-trained dogs, eager to please their masters. And having been subjected to prolonged and intense propaganda, coercion, and manipulation, most of those who obeyed those regimes, who voted for those regimes, who empowered those regimes and cheered for those regimes, felt completely justified and morally virtuous and superior based on their compliance with the commands of their political rulers. They felt deep pride in their subservience and deep contempt for any who did not share their blind faith and their blind obedience. And so, as a result, the worst tyrants in history were widely adored and cheered for, even by the very people that the tyrants ended up abusing. Among so many well-intentioned but duped populations, authoritarian agendas have been wildly popular, while resistors have been few and far between, scorned and despised by the majority. But even with all of that in mind, is it really fair for me to suggest that a lot of you, had you lived under those tyrannical regimes, wouldn't have been on the side of truth and justice, but instead would have been loyal, brainwashed cheerleaders for sadistic megalomaniacs? Is it fair for me to think that you would have been so gullible, so weak-minded, so unprincipled, that you would have fallen for the classic divide and conquer and fear-mongering tactics of power-happy sociopaths, to the point that even you would have zealously supported the oppression and victimization of your fellow man, and self-righteously condemned any who resisted or objected to such oppression? Well, yes, I think that is fair. Because that's exactly what I've watched a lot of you do for the past 2 fucking years. You know who you are. You're the ones who blindly believed and obeyed those in power and condemned anyone who didn't. You're the ones who didn't research anything, didn't question anything, didn't look at any actual data. Instead, you fell for ridiculous fear-mongering, and then you repeated it, and you despised anyone who didn't. You jumped on the bandwagon and then felt virtuous, mindlessly accepting and pushing an insane and destructive authoritarian agenda. You know who you are. And even though the power-happy psychopaths whose boots you've been licking all this time have been caught lying over and over and over again, you still mindlessly label anyone who doesn't bow and kiss the ring as a purveyor of misinformation. You hate whomever those in power tell you to hate without bothering to listen to a word they say. Even when the government lies are obvious, the fear-mongering is obvious, the actual conspiracy is glaringly obvious, not even hidden, you still deny it, and you still attack anyone stating the truth. And you tell yourself that it's because you care more, because you're more enlightened, you're more responsible. But that is a lie. You did it because you were scared, you were ignorant, you were gullible, and you were obedient, and you tried to pass that off as virtue. It was easier and felt safer to you to believe whatever you thought the majority believed, rather than having to actually think for yourself. And as others tried to counter the obvious lies and counter the ridiculous fear-mongering and counter the psychotic power grabs, it was easier for you to just decide that those people didn't care as much as you, weren't as informed as you, weren't as responsible as you. You followed the crowd without spending one moment trying to find the truth. You kept clinging to the utterly asinine notion that the dictates and mandates from the political parasites were about safety, health, and protecting the people. You cheered for more authoritarian control to the detriment of the freedom and health and safety of everyone you know. Because your feelings mattered more to you than the truth, and mattered more to you than your fellow man. Deep down inside, I think you knew that. You were just too much of a spineless coward to do anything else. No matter how many times the political opportunists were caught lying, no matter how many times they were proven wrong and had to change their story and contradict themselves, and no matter how many times the people who you scorned were proven right, you didn't have the brains, the spine, or the honesty to admit that you were wrong. That your obedience didn't protect anyone or make anyone safer. That your compliance didn't make you more caring and virtuous. It only made you a useful idiot who could be used as a pawn by power-happy lunatics. You kept mindlessly repeating whatever lines the talking heads fed you, talking about trusting the science while being utterly and intentionally clueless about the actual science and data. You enjoyed self-righteously lecturing others about how they too should mindlessly believe and obey political liars and crooks the way you do. It gave you a feeling of belonging and moral superiority to be part of a crowd of well-trained sheep, believing and obeying whatever ridiculous crap the state propagandists spewed at you day after day. You tried so hard to tell yourself that obeying tyrants and hating anyone who didn't made you informed and compassionate. So yes, if you're one of the ones I've been describing here, you are exactly the type that supported all of those historical tyrants, taking great pride in their blind obedience, delighting in condemning and attacking any who had the brains and the courage to actually question things, to speak out, and to disobey the insane and deadly authoritarian agendas. And now, as the truth is coming out all over the place, what you will probably do is get very quiet and hope that no one remembers how you supported and repeated the lies. You supported the destructive dictates and restrictions that destroyed millions of lives. You hope people will forget that you were a cheerleader for authoritarian evil. So if you want to deny that you would have done the exact same thing had you lived in those other times, in those other places, then maybe right here and right fucking now, you should stop empowering the worst people in the world. Admit you were wrong. Admit you were deceived. Admit that you helped cheer for immoral and destructive authoritarian coercion and injustice, that you helped push the agenda of megalomaniacs and murderers. And don't pretend that your supposed good intentions are a valid excuse for what you were part of, for what your compliance helped make happen. Unless you think that those who empowered those other murderous regimes in history should get a pass as long as they meant well. And once you've acknowledged what you did, then stop being an apologist for political psychopaths. Until you do, you don't deserve the respect and compassion of your fellow man. You've acted as an enabler of evil. Until you admit your mistake and change your words and your behavior, you don't deserve to be trusted or listened to. You don't deserve forgiveness. Like all the others in history who empowered dictators and tyrants, until you do what you can to correct your mistake, you deserve contempt and condemnation for the massive pain and suffering that you helped to create. And some of us won't forget.